What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at Avaya is what the world needs.
Hello, Avaya family. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner Ike Allen and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of Avaya University. Avaya is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you so much for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Dr. Abby Blakeslee, is back with us today to talk about restoring your body's compass, overcoming people-pleasing and perfectionism. Dr. Blakeslee is faculty at the Somatic Experiencing Trauma Institute and Foundation for Human Enrichment. She is additionally Dr. Peter Levine's legacy faculty at Ergos Institute for Somatic Education. She holds a PhD in clinical and somatic psychology and is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Her dissertation with a committee that included Dr. Daniel Siegel generated original research on the role of implicit memory in healing trauma. She integrates somatic experiencing with clinical research, secondary trauma interventions, and the psychobiological principles of attachment and shock trauma. Welcome back to Avaya.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. We were just discussing, it's been a while.
It has. It has been a long while. And so we're so glad to have you back and talking about a really great topic today. I'm so glad that you were interested. Why don't we get started with just a little overview of what the role of the body is in healing?
Yeah, so there are many different ways to approach healing. So as I talk about some particular ways that I'm trained in, I would just want to validate all of your explorations, different ways that you're seeking for healing and self-realization. I think that there's just many paths to healing. One of the greatest paths that I have found to healing, and that I also teach nationally and internationally, has to do with the body. And when an event occurs that is overwhelming, there are multiple channels of how we will remember that experience or learn from that experience, or sometimes get stuck in that experience as if it's still occurring, or there's a repetition that revisits us, or we don't quite shake it off or get out of it. And one of the things that contributes to that is our wonderful survival system.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime, whether it's a threat that's real or imagined, our body will mobilize to protect itself. And we move into something that we would call survival physiology. Okay? Now, there are many different somatic therapies, somatic experiencing being a primary one, and that's a primary one that I teach. It's somatic is body oriented, and experiencing is a verb. So it's the experience of your body in the present moment in relationship to exploring to see if there's some signaling of survival physiology that continues to occur after the event is over. Or, let's say in people-pleasing or perfectionism, it could be a relational dynamic, an adaptation that was set up early in life, and like an imprint, right? Or an adaptive strategy that helped us to survive or remain connected, that later on can become maladaptive. It doesn't suit the needs of the moment, but because it's primed in our survival physiology, the body will say, do that again. It helped you to survive. Or that's familiar. I'm going to keep doing that because that's going to give me the best outcome towards sort of my deeper sense of self too can often get hooked into or connected to some of these states. So one of the keys in healing from trauma or healing from many of these past events is to drop down and to ask yourself, what am I sensing in my body right now? When I think about the time that I said, I'm remembering one of the times where I was really learning about my own body's signaling. And there were a whole bunch of friends that were going down to see the fireworks at 4th of July. And I was super excited. I love fireworks. They're one of my favorite things in the whole wide world. And then a couple of my better friends said, nah, we don't want to go. We're just going to stay home. And I kept having this unsettled feeling in my stomach. What is that about? Why am I feeling so sick to my stomach? And then I just kept kind of going on and being in my people-pleasing mode and being connected. And I kept having that feeling of almost like lead in my belly. And I realized, I'm disappointed. I want to go see the fireworks. And I said to my friends, if you don't want to go see the fireworks, that's fine, but I'm going to go myself, and any of you are welcome to go. And immediately I felt this sort of lightening, kind of opening, softening energy. It was hard for me to do that at that time. I've gotten much better. But this is an example, right, of something, that kind of strategy for a long time in my family of origin and transgenerational trauma was something that was really helpful for me. But it's something that I've had to unlearn, or to find some kind of new way to listen often to the signals that I'm receiving that tend to be under the conscious radar.
Good example. I love that. That's a great one, and I'm sure everyone watching can relate in some way, shape, or form to that. Right? Being excited to do something they like to do, and other people didn't want to do it, and right, having that experience of some kind of physical signal if we don't honor right what it is that we want to do and kind of go along with the pack. So like from a biological perspective, why do we people please? What's the reason for this?
Yeah. Well, I know we don't have a lot of time, so I picked a few things out from or concepts or theories or ideas that I want to share. So continue to explore, everyone. But one of the things that I often think about is that when we first come into existence, many people talk about character structures or developmental phases. And your very first phase of life, we would call it existence structure. Is this world safe for me to inhabit? Is this body safe for me to inhabit? And it's not just the environment that we're born into, but it's in the systems or the families or the communities. It's the whole field of what we experience in these very earliest imprints of coming into the world. So you're coming into existence, and what are we doing? Well, we're kind of developing our nervous system at that time. You have sympathetic for excitation, for movement, right? Pleasant or unpleasant. Your emotion, right? You could be expressive, you could be in protest, or you could be crying, right? All of those would be more excitation, sympathetic. Or you could have these restful states, parasympathetic, rest and digest, soft, parasympathetic. We might also have freeze states, which are heavy parasympathetic space. All systems off, conservation withdrawal, immobility, go into hiding, play dead, those kinds of things. So when you're an infant, your caregivers are generally the external regulatory nervous systems for your nervous system. You don't have much capacity to downregulate. You don't have a developed parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system. And that's developing through myelination and other processes for about 2.5 years of life, including moving from more of these unconscious to more kind of having more memory or kind of who you think you are. So I wrote something down: existence relational, existence relational, existence relational. So when there are ruptures or adaptations a lot of the time that happen and it could be transgenerational trauma, collective trauma, individual trauma, trauma with our parents, right? There's many different potential contributors to where we as the infant might become dysregulated, or we as the infant are really seeking whatever that attunement or that matching or that mirroring is externally, and that we're not receiving what we need. So for many people, this sort of being in the relationship becomes part of, do I have the right to exist? Is it safe for me to exist without the other? So it becomes a very enmeshed and undifferentiated state where we're consistently attuned to others. Now, that being said, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is sometimes when our caregivers have their own trauma, which of course, being a mother, I know I do too, and hopefully we're on this journey of healing together in families. But when many infants have to give up their own needs in order to caretake the needs of a parent that might be depressed or suicidal or might have personality disorder or bipolar, many different kinds of things, their own trauma, PTSD. And so this is another constellation where a lot of the time the person will grow up with that orientation to making sure that you're okay. And they lose a sense of this self state, right? By being attuned to the other, which is really about their survival ultimately, right? Because if mom's okay, mom's going to feed me, give me my clothes, hopefully nurture me in some way. And so you don't have that option to run away or to fight. You also have this deep biological need. The younger you are, the more of a necessity that is to attach and to bond.
That's so fascinating. I especially love what you said. You said, is it safe for me to exist without the other? That really rang true for me. Just in even in your example of the fireworks, like if anyone can extrapolate that out to their life, right? If you've had an experience like that, ooh, is it okay for me to have my own opinion and exist over here when they have their existence over here and their opinions? I thought that was a really just hit home for me, at least. A great way of explaining it.
Yeah. And, with an example that's in some ways, it's this day-to-day example around the fireworks. There are other kind of more, high risk kinds of things that are happening too, where there might be somebody in a relationship where there's domestic violence or unstable relationships where, predicting somebody's mood can save you many times. And so we have that sometimes a hypervigilance to the other, whether it's to please or to appease or to validate, which often we sacrifice our own self needs or our own biological rhythms. What's more common is that we're not even in contact with that, right? We dissociate the ability to feel it because it sets up a contradiction between which needs take primacy, because that pattern of survival and the adaptations in the early relationships tend to take some of that primacy. I wanted to mention too, many people who are people pleasers have lovely gifts, right? They like people much of the time. They also tend to be pretty empathically attuned. So empathy is emotion, but it's also feeling felt or feeling into someone else's feelings and then being able to be in connection with them around that. So many people who have these kind of tendencies, let's say, often can have very deep, rich, and rewarding relationships up to a certain point, because there's also ways, when you lose your deeper connection to what you want, what you don't want, and ultimately what your boundaries are. A lot of the time there's a potential for there to be, some kinds of, you know, under the radar aggression that starts to sneak out, right? I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, and then I'm not, right? Or passive aggressive tendencies, these things, because I omit how I feel, I omit how I feel. And then all of a sudden it pops out, and the person goes, well, why didn't you tell me a week ago? Or why are you so upset? Everything was fine until just a few minutes ago. I had no idea that you were hurting. Or this doesn't feel fair, right? So these would be other things that we might begin to look at.
Yeah. Yeah, good examples. And so what would be some strategies on overcoming, right, our people-pleasing tendencies with the body's help?
Yeah. Well, let me bring in one more metaphor and then I'll bring a few ideas in here. I like the metaphor with anxious attachment. So anxious attachment is very much around the other. I need the other in order to survive. Well, when you're a baby, if you were left in the woods alone, what would happen?
You would die.
That's right.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of the felt sense of the signaling with anxious attachment, which many people pleasers tend to have. Um, and so it's this feeling of existential anxiety. So if I don't get the phone call back, or if I don't say the right thing and the person is frustrated, or if I don't fit in with the pack, then I'll be abandoned. But not just that, I'll be abandoned and I'll die alone in the woods.
Mm.
Right? I know that's a very extreme example. So what I want to invite people to do is to notice the felt sense of anxiety in your body, right? To notice the signals of that. Charged with fear arousal often can feel like constriction, but once the constriction releases, so if you can put your hand over the constriction or sense around the constriction, or give it time with just your attention on it to soften on its own, don't make it go away. You often will feel jittery, bumpy, twitchy, electricity. It could be a vibration. You might even have a bit of a shaky feeling or a wobbly feeling. A lot of the time with attachment too, it feels kind of like sick to your stomach because it's this really early dysregulation around attachment and survival in the whole GI tract. But if you can let that move in your body or track it and feel your feet, feel your legs, so kind of you have your big container to allow it to move. And then usually what will happen is it will spread and you'll take a deeper breath and you'll begin to settle little by little by little. And what used to feel like kind of a fear will begin to feel softer, slower, more manageable. Yeah. So down regulating from these states of anxiety, I liked to imagine when I was really working with this, a baby crying in the woods or protesting, see me, like a good toddler tantrum. But to just kind of hold and be with the feeling of that and with the charge of that. I mean, it's powerful. And then I become that witness. I'm here with you. I'm not leaving you. Your friends can stay here and, do the fireworks, or it's okay that you had a disagreement, right? Or you don't see eye to eye. You can have your own opinion here. And then allowing that to settle. And then sometimes I move back into connection with the person to have a conversation from a different place. Or I might really just feel into my boundary and then do what I need to do, which is often separate or different from whatever, some of the original feeling of needing to go along, right? Or to, instead of immediately saying, I'm sorry, right? I might pause for a minute and track that anxiety. Maybe I didn't do anything where I need to apologize, right? That might be something from the past. Yeah. So down regulation, another one which is really nice, and this is the easy one to do, is you can imagine a color bubble around yourself and a color bubble around another person. So, Andy, if I ask you to do that, what color would you maybe put around yourself right now?
Purple, my favorite.
Yes, great. So see that, feel that, maybe be in your purple sphere. And then if you put me in a color, what color would you imagine around me?
Yellow.
A yellow. And so see me in my yellow sphere. And notice that we can be in the same space here. We're connected, we're making eye contact, I'm having a lovely time. But that we're also in these separate spheres. That's a very quick one that you can do, even with a group of people, so that you can begin to feel some of your own self needs, your own rhythm, and check inside. This boundary piece is really important. Preferences, what I like, what I don't like, how I might be able to then connect words to express that. So that I begin to feel more into my own preferences, my own needs, my own interests. You could use even some of this as you feel the sphere, some of those statements. I have a right to exist. I have a right to have wants. I have a right to have needs. I have a right to say no. And I could imagine you having that in your sphere and I having that in my sphere. And this is really, I think, for people pleaser tendencies, when we have a rupture and a repair in close relationships, the relationships can build into a higher order. If we try to maintain it as being perfect or always giving over to the other's needs, eventually things will rupture to a point where it begins to sabotage the relationship. Like, I want to know when my friend or my partner or my kids are distressed or frustrated with something in their lives, and frustrated with maybe something I did or said. And then we get to have connection around that.
Mm-hmm.
So this quest for authenticity, I would say, is really important.
Mm.
And you may be in a situation where it could be dangerous, or maybe not, and the hierarchical needs of a moment. I mean that in like, you're working with somebody who might be in a position of power over you. With appeasement strategies, which is another way that we might survive, there can be power in that, of doing the thing that you needed to do in order to get through the difficult experience. But then please come around with trusted others and process it and feel your boundary. I didn't want to say that. I don't agree. Or I had mixed feelings. I know I had to present in this particular way, but when I feel into it, I also have the feeling of withdrawing, or I have a feeling of needing to move in a particular way or say something else. And as you say it to the trustful person, notice how your body responds so you don't hold all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to bring that other piece around, because there are times where it may be an important strategy within society to do that.
Right.
But come back to your authentic sense and find a safe other to express that to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point, because we all can relate to scenarios where we, yes, like you said, maybe we need to present in a certain way, but it's not necessarily our truth, right? But remembering that, okay, don't lie to ourselves. I'm like, okay, but this is what I really wish I had said or wanted to say under different circumstances. And yes, the importance of that. And I love your color bubbles. That's so fun. That's a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another one too, you can, if you're going, sometimes people get really overwhelmed with big events and things, and you can also wear clothing that is almost like a protective barrier, whether it's a shawl or a scarf or a big coat,
Mm-hmm.
but to feel yourself on the inside. It's not a rigid boundary necessarily. Hopefully it's permeable to let in the goodness and then, synthesize out all of the toxins.
Mm-hmm.
But to have that kind of felt sense of, this is my space,
Right.
and I get to determine, what's right for me in any given moment. But the more that people, I think, can increase your own awareness of your bodily signals, and down regulate, because just because your body is saying I'm afraid, it might also be saying I'm afraid because I have to adapt to everybody else's needs, or this baby is going to be left alone in the woods. So you may need to down regulate that inner physiological imprint of the younger part of you, and then assess, what do I want, what do I need, how do I feel? And that brings us more into authentic relationship with ourselves, and then also with others.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yes, absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much. A great explanation of people pleasing, right? Where it comes from, why we develop it, what are some things we can do to overcome it. And I love to also talk about perfectionism, something we both said
Yeah.
that we tend to have bits of in our own lives. So what, from a biological and developmental perspective, why do we get caught up in trying to be perfect?
Well, maybe our books can talk to one another. um,
Right, there you go.
a personal example, right? So I came on the Zoom call and I said, am I too fluffy here? Because I've just been kids' first day of school and kind of running around and also settling back in. We were talking about the need for kind of tapping into, well, what is my rhythm now that the kids are back in school? And um, I think that there's this, these pieces around um, self-reflection that are really necessary. But with perfectionism, the self-reflection tends to hold us to a high standard, right? And many systems, many nervous systems, we could say, this would look like a type A personality, go, go, go. We're also rewarded for the things that we achieve. At least in many Western cultures, I know in US culture, that's often true. So we get reflected back that striving to be perfect, striving to always have a goal, striving to achieve is something that is consistently desirable. So on some level, I want to name it as something that is often in the cultural myth, right? Or the hero or the heroine's journey, and then often we find that we in those myths, right, you're not able to attain the thing. You actually have to go down into the underworld or into the adverse experience, and you meet your allies along the way, or there's some kind of journey where then you dissolve, and then you rebuild yourself and you bring some sort of boon back or some treasure back into the world. I really like a lot of that because I think that there is something around, again, this feeling of those early fears in relationship around survival. So one of them is, if I'm not perfect, I'll be abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
Or I ask people, what in your family of origin was the consequence when you didn't do something well? Or when you didn't do something in a structured way? I mean, many people say, well, we wouldn't eat, right? My brothers and sisters wouldn't get to school. Or, in families where there's violence, right? We would be hit or disciplined, right? Or there's sexual violence. And there's lots of potential consequences too, where there can be trauma, right? Where, okay, well then I'm gonna look a certain way, I'm gonna move a certain way, I'm gonna make sure that all of these tasks are done so that we're gonna eat, or that myself or my siblings won't be harmed. So you can look at that adaptation and those strategies. And what's really important, if I'm speaking to you right now, many of you listeners, is that you pat your survival system on the back and say, thank you. You did what you did in order to survive, or to help your family survive. And so acknowledgement of that. And then now, hopefully, you're in some new contexts and some new circumstances, or you're thinking about choices that might lead you to that too, where you can begin to notice, oh, if I don't lay out everything beforehand, that actually doesn't mean that I'm not going to be able to eat, or that my sister is going to starve, or that doesn't mean that I'm going to be hit. But my physiology is driving me forward as if this is imperative, right?
Yeah.
So what are, some of those things, again, are noticing what's the charge that's underneath this? What's the fear? What's the worry? What's the old message of the cost of, if I didn't do this, then, right? Oh, I'll be abandoned. But what's the felt sense of the fear of the abandonment? The sensations in your chest, your face, your arms, your legs. And can you begin to accompany that place in you and allow it to complete or move, or talk about it with people, do some somatic experiencing work, or even just stay with the feeling of that as it spreads and moves? Then we have something where you don't have that same, you might choose to lay your clothes out, you might choose to stay up late to work on a project, but you're not driven to it, right? With that underlying fear of that something might happen if I don't.
Yeah, that's a good distinction, so that, right, we could still be a person who likes to achieve, or what have you, but or be clean or something like that, but it doesn't mean it has to come from a place of fear, right, underneath it all.
Yeah, and urgency, the necessity of urgency. Yeah, because when I had to, I want to work with people who have lived through, horrific war experiences or refugees, and you have to be very, very ordered much of the time for your basic needs of survival. And then, as you move out of some of the, hopefully, as you move out of some of those conditions into more stable environments, then in some ways the nervous system can remain primed in those ways. I think transgenerational trauma is also a really big one, because I know a lot of people who don't identify with many of these kind of more big T traumas or relational traumas. They say, well, no, I was just, my parents were strong achievers, or, that's the belief. Achieving things can be wonderful. So I also want to name that many of these things that we talk about can be strengths. But if we begin to lose our sense of self, or we go into hypertension, or we're starting to have phases of burnout, right, where we start to collapse, or we're getting irritable with ourselves and our loved ones, these would be places where we're overextending into some of these patterns. And we may have parents who just model that from their transgenerational, maybe it was grandma or grandpa or great grandma, great grandpa, back, that had some of these bigger T traumas that get passed along. So then the infant and the kid learns, I got to do it this way, or I'm ousted, or there's a consequence, but the consequence is back in a previous generation. Yeah. And we all have those threads, right? This is the piece of human history and reality. I think a lot about the pandemic, and how is that going to affect my kids, our kids? We have a whole generation that had a lot of suffering, and a lot of challenges. So we'll see. But we have these things that happen individually, but there's this big collective piece. But quieting down, you can work with transgenerational trauma in this moment, because in your physiology is the epigenetic, but also the imprint of that. And so we can listen in. Well, before I do the third project today, or before I go and check my hair again, or maybe the little bit of anxiety that I felt around, okay to do the webinar like this, or do I need to do more? A small amount, but something around that piece, right? I sat with some of I feel a little edge of curiosity, maybe discomfort around my fluffy hair. But I also then had this feeling of, I'm going to be with someone I know, I'm going to be with a community of people. And here we're talking about perfectionism. I'm not going to go out and get the hairspray, right? It's also about just come as you are, show up, be yourself. So check in with yourself. Notice those little moments, or those larger moments, and then ask yourself, what do I feel? What sensations are here? Is there a felt sense of urgency? And if I have that adrenalized kind of feeling, could I maybe put my hand on my belly or my chest? We could do that right now. If you put your hand on your belly and your chest, feel your back body, like your back connected to the chair. Or if you're standing, you could feel your feet on the floor. And then take a moment just to look away from the screen and orient around your space. You might see something that's pleasant in your environment, or something that you connect to, or even just moving from having that direct attention. In our culture, we have periods of fierce focus, right? So this is biological orienting. And those are things that often help: visual, auditory, stabilizing through touch, or noticing places that are more grounded, back body, also sometimes the feeling of the earth. Those tend to move people slightly more parasympathetic. So practice letting your body settle before making the decision to move forward. And then check to see, do I need to do this now? Do I want to do this now? Would it be beneficial for me to take a moment? A lot of the time when we do that, what do we get in contact with too?
Our body.
sadness. What's that?
Our body, emotions, our body.
Body, emotion. Yeah, right. Like maybe some sadness. I woke up so early. I feel sad. It's been really hard, right? Or maybe this feeling of um, that feeling of always not being good enough, so I need to strive.
Mhm.
So there might be that kind of quality, but ultimately when you get in contact with it, there might be some grief or maybe even some anger or frustration. So sometimes slowing down and feeling your emotional body and letting your feelings begin to move through is one of those things that can begin to bring us into what one of my therapists said to me long ago when I was in grad school. Actually, I was in two grad schools at the same time. She was sort of helping me to feel it's okay to dissolve, right? And the thing that she said to me is, I bet you weren't really allowed to be a mess very often. I was like, mess? She's like, well, why don't you just say this? I am a beautiful mess. I like that one. That stuck with me for a long time to kind of enter in. For some people with perfectionism, the question isn't, um, how are you, what positive things are you feeling today? It's what's not working well. What are you struggling with? Where are you stuck? Almost like flipping a little bit over from that continuous, well, I'm going to solve this by doing this. It's going into what we might think as more negative or more messy or more difficult feelings and letting that be okay and settling in kind of with that conscious witness, I care, I'm with you, I'm not leaving you, letting some of the feelings move through, and then checking to see when there's less charge in the system around, well, what is it that I feel that I want to do, that I have to do, or that I'm driven to do, but what do I want to do?
Good example. And I love the beautiful mess. That's fun. I like that. Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing. And I feel like we could talk about this for hours. It's a beautiful discovery in the world of people pleasing and perfectionism, and what are some, ways we can overcome those. I'd love it if you'd also share about how people can learn more about you as well as somatic experiencing.
Absolutely. So you can find me on my website. I'm really excited. I'm developing a whole embodiment program that will be coming soon. And then we also have the Somatic Experiencing International. So I am a faculty member for them. If you are a professional or you have any practice that you work with trauma in the body, whether you're an educator or a spiritual counselor or a body worker, and you want to learn more about trauma in the nervous system, it's one of the best modalities, I think, in the world. That's hence I teach it, in overcoming trauma and increasing resilience. So you can apply for a 3-year professional program. You can learn more about somatic experiencing. There's also lots of articles, so even if you're not interested in learning it in a professional way, you can look for a practitioner directory, or you can look through several of our different articles and publications that we have more about the work. And then there's Peter Levine's Ergos Institute for Somatic Education. There are retreats that Dr. Peter Levine has been doing recently for people's personal healing. There's often public workshops that you can go to and ongoing webinars and information there as well.
Well, thank you for sharing about all that, and everyone watching or listening. All the links to those 3 things we just talked about are below. So you can just click right through to go to Abby's website as well as the other 2. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been
You're
so
welcome.
great to be with you and connect with you. And do you have any last insights before we wrap up?
Well, just encouragement for everyone to live a more embodied life. And that takes a certain quality of presencing or pausing. Take a pause, check in, notice where you are, and be with yourself in a compassionate way and allow things to move. And I think that in this way, this is a place where we can find some of our deepest sense of self and also feel inspired. And it's a place where creativity begins to emerge too. So I want to just really say I appreciate being with you and with everybody here.
Well, we appreciate you too. Thank you so much, Abby. And thank you to the Avaya students who are watching or listening right now for showing up for yourself on your journey. And we'll see you all again very soon. Take care. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me for this last class with Dr. Abby Blakeslee. She was back with us today talking about restoring your body's compass, overcoming people-pleasing and perfectionism. We explored these topics in a really beautiful way. I think Abby does such a great job of explaining this in such a compassionate, loving way. And we looked at what are the biological reasons and what are the developmental reasons that we become people pleasers, that we become perfectionists. And we took a look at all the things that may have happened in our childhoods, the situations we were in, the trauma, big T or small t, that we could have experienced that could have led to these coping mechanisms. And we talked a lot about things like if in relationship to people pleasing, right? Asking yourself the question, is it safe for me to exist without the other? I thought that was beautiful when she described her example of wanting to go to the fireworks and other friends not wanting to go with her. And so she didn't go for a while and she people pleased and had a really bad feeling in her stomach. When she said that phrase, is it safe for me to exist without the other? That's what I was thinking of. So have you been in scenarios where you go along with the crowd, you go along with what other people want to do? And in that, are you asking yourself, ooh, is it safe for me to exist without these other people? If I don't do what everyone else does, will I still exist? Can I be my own person? Who am I without these other people, right? So these are all interesting things to ask yourself when you catch yourself in those people-pleasing moments. And then we also talked about existential anxiety. And I thought that was a really great way of describing some of the experiences we have when we people please, because we're worried that if we don't people please, we're going to be abandoned. We're going to be rejected. What if we're all alone in the woods as a baby? We're not going to survive. So remembering in those moments that, oh, wait, I'm not in the situation of being a baby in the woods and not being able to survive without others. And, talking yourself down, right? Relaxing your nervous system, coming back into that parasympathetic state, because you're not in this catastrophic scenario necessarily when you're deciding whether or not to go to the fireworks, right? So I think that was a really great example of a technique we could use in situations like that. So I hope that you found this helpful, everyone. Always great to have you, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Avaya has changed my life.
Avaya has made me the woman I am today.
Avaya is my home.
Avaya is personal freedom.
Avaya is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about Avaya.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, Avaya, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at Avaya is what the world needs.